Have you ever seen someone get laughed at, only for everyone to realize seconds later they just made the biggest mistake of their career? Because what happened on that quiet highway one summer afternoon shocked an entire police department and changed one officer's life forever. It started with a simple traffic stop. But when the officer mocked one woman and told her to call her husband, he had no idea that phone call would bring someone he never expected, the police chief. And when the truth came out, the entire situation flipped upside down. Stay with me, because this story proves one powerful lesson. Never underestimate someone based on appearances. And trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. The afternoon sun burned brightly over the quiet highway just outside the city, the heat dancing across the asphalt as cars passed in steady waves. Officer Daniel Mercer leaned against his patrol car, watching traffic while adjusting his radio. It had been a slow day, the kind that made minutes feel like hours. He had been on duty for nearly 8 hours, and aside from a few minor speeding violations, nothing had really happened. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee and glanced at the passing vehicles, hoping something would break the monotony. Then his radar beeped sharply, jolting his attention. A red sedan had just flown past well above the speed limit. Daniel sighed, pushed off the hood of his patrol car, and switched on his siren and lights. The familiar wail echoed down the highway as he pulled out smoothly behind the speeding vehicle. The red sedan slowed after a few seconds and finally drifted onto the shoulder of the road. Daniel parked carefully behind it, radioed in the stop, and stepped out, adjusting his belt as he approached the driver's side window. Inside the car sat a young woman gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her breathing looked uneven, and her eyes darted toward the rearview mirror. Daniel noticed her tense posture immediately. He tapped lightly on the window, maintaining a professional expression. The woman rolled it down slowly, revealing a face streaked with sweat and worry. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Daniel said calmly. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The woman shook her head slightly, though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. She swallowed hard before speaking. "Was I speeding, officer?" "You were driving 15 miles above the limit," Daniel replied. "May I see your license and registration, please?" Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse. She fumbled through several items before finally handing him the documents. Daniel studied her carefully while pretending to examine the papers. Something felt off. He had handled hundreds of traffic stops, and he knew the difference between normal nervousness and genuine fear. This woman looked terrified. He leaned down slightly. "Is everything all right?" he asked. She hesitated for a long moment before nodding quickly. "Yes, officer. Everything is fine." Daniel wasn't convinced, but he stepped back toward his patrol car to run her information. As he typed her details into the system, he glanced through his mirror. The woman hadn't moved. She sat stiffly, staring straight ahead, her hands gripping the wheel like she was afraid to let go. Her record came back clean. No prior offenses, no warrants, nothing suspicious. He stepped out again and returned to her vehicle. "Ma'am," he said, handing back her documents. "I'm going to issue you a warning today. Please keep your speed down." Relief flickered across her face for a split second, but it quickly faded into anxiety again. Daniel hesitated before turning away. Something in his gut told him not to walk back to his car yet. He leaned slightly toward the open window. "Are you sure everything is okay?" he asked again, lowering his voice. She glanced toward the passenger seat, then back at him. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but she stopped herself. "Yes," she said softly. Daniel nodded slowly, but he didn't believe her. He had just begun to step back when suddenly another patrol car pulled onto the shoulder behind him. The tires crunched against the gravel as the second vehicle came to a stop. Daniel turned, surprised to see Chief Robert Harlan stepping out. The chief rarely appeared at routine traffic stops, especially out on the highway. His presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. Chief Harlan walked toward Daniel with a stern expression. "Mercer," he said sharply, "what's the situation here?" "Routine traffic stop, sir," Daniel replied. "Speeding violation. I've issued a warning." The chief glanced at the woman inside the car with a curious expression. He approached her window, leaning down slightly. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" The woman's eyes widened slightly as she looked at him. She shook her head quickly. "No, sir." The chief straightened and looked at Daniel again, stepping back respectfully. Chief Harlan leaned toward the window once more, his voice dropping low enough that Daniel couldn't hear the full conversation. The woman's expression changed slowly as they spoke. Fear turned into hesitation, and hesitation turned into something that looked like hope mixed with uncertainty. After a moment, the chief nodded toward Daniel. "Officer Mercer," he called. "Step over here for a moment." Daniel approached, confusion growing. The chief folded his arms. "I want you to ask her to step out of the vehicle." Daniel blinked. "Sir, is there a reason?" "Just do it," the chief replied calmly. Daniel turned back toward the woman. "Ma'am, could you please step out of the vehicle?" She froze, panic flashing across her face. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Daniel said gently. "We just need to speak with you outside the car." She hesitated before slowly opening the door and stepping out. The warm air wrapped around them as she stood beside the vehicle. Daniel noticed faint bruising along her wrist, partially hidden beneath a bracelet. His stomach tightened slightly. The chief's eyes seemed to notice it too. "Ma'am," the chief said gently, "I'm going to ask you something important. Are you safe at home?" The question seemed to strike her like a sudden storm. Her eyes filled with tears instantly, and she looked down at the pavement. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Cars rushed past on the highway, their sound blending into the background. "It's okay," the chief continued softly. "You're not in trouble." She shook her head slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm not safe," she whispered. Daniel felt his chest tighten as he exchanged a quick glance with the chief. The situation had just changed completely. The chief nodded slightly, giving Daniel a signal to stay calm. "Do you want to tell us what's happening?" the chief asked. She hesitated again, wiping her tears with trembling fingers. "My husband, he controls everything. Where I go, who I talk to. I wasn't supposed to be out today. If he finds out I was stopped." Her voice cracked as she trailed off. Daniel felt anger simmer quietly beneath his calm exterior. He had seen cases like this before, but each one hit differently. The chief spoke gently, asking careful questions while the woman slowly revealed more details. She described years of emotional manipulation, threats, and escalating fear. She explained that she had been driving to visit her sister for the first time in months, hoping to gather the courage to leave. "Does he know where you are right now?" Daniel asked. She shook her head. "He tracks my phone. I turned it off before I left, but he'll notice soon." The chief nodded thoughtfully. "Do you have somewhere safe you can stay?" "My sister," she said quickly. "But she lives across town." Daniel looked toward the highway, thinking rapidly. The chief turned to him. "Mercer, call it in. We're going to assist her." Daniel nodded, stepping back to his radio. As he spoke with dispatch, he could see the woman clutching her arms tightly, her fear still evident. When he returned, the chief was speaking reassuringly to her. "We're going to make sure you get somewhere safe," the chief said. "You're not alone in this." The woman looked up, disbelief flickering across her tearful eyes. "Why are you helping me?" The chief smiled faintly. "Because that's our job, and because sometimes people just need someone to stand beside them." Daniel noticed her shoulders relax slightly for the first time since the stop began. The tension in the air began to ease, replaced by cautious hope. He gestured toward his patrol car. "We can escort you to your sister's house," he said, "and we can help you speak with someone who specializes in situations like this." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears again. "Thank you," she whispered. As Daniel prepared to coordinate the escort, his radio crackled with an incoming message from dispatch. His expression shifted as he listened carefully. He looked toward the chief. "Sir," he said quietly, "dispatch reports a vehicle matching her husband's description was seen heading toward this highway 15 minutes ago." The woman's face drained of color instantly. The chief's expression hardened slightly, his calm authority returning in full force. "All right," he said steadily. "Let's move quickly." Daniel opened the rear door of his patrol car so the woman could sit safely inside. The chief moved to his own vehicle, preparing to lead the escort. The tension returned, but this time it carried determination rather than fear. Daniel started his engine, glancing in his mirror as the woman sat quietly behind him, her hands clasped together in silent prayer. The sirens remained off as they pulled back onto the highway, blending into traffic as naturally as possible. Daniel's eyes scanned every situation was far from over. He adjusted his radio again, updating dispatch with their movement and requesting additional units to monitor surrounding roads. Behind him, the woman finally spoke softly. "Officer, do you think he'll find me?" Daniel met her eyes through the mirror. "Not today," he said firmly. She nodded slowly, though fear still lingered. The convoy continued moving through traffic, each mile bringing them closer to safety, but also closer to whatever confrontation might still lie ahead. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel, prepared for anything. And miles away, a dark SUV accelerated onto the highway, its driver scanning the road with growing frustration and rage. The convoy moved steadily through traffic, each vehicle maintaining a careful distance from one another. Officer Daniel Mercer kept his eyes constantly shifting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. The woman in the back seat sat rigidly, her fingers intertwined so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. The silence inside the patrol car felt heavy, filled only by the low hum of the engine and the faint crackle of the police radio. Daniel knew she was terrified, but he also knew that fear could sometimes cloud judgment. He needed her calm and focused. "You're doing the right thing," Daniel said gently, breaking the silence. She swallowed hard, staring down at her hands. "I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm making the biggest mistake of my life." "Leaving a dangerous situation is never a mistake," Daniel replied calmly. "It takes courage, more than most people realize." She looked up slightly, her eyes glossy with tears that threatened to fall again. "He always said no one would believe me, that if I tried to leave, I'd lose everything." Daniel adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. "That's something people say when they're trying to control someone. You're not losing everything. You're gaining your freedom." She didn't respond immediately, but her shoulders lowered slightly, as if the weight pressing down on her chest had eased just a little. Outside, the city skyline began to rise in the distance, buildings stretching toward the sky like silent witnesses to thousands of stories unfolding beneath them. Daniel's radio crackled suddenly. "Unit 4, this is dispatch. We have confirmation that the dark SUV registered to Marcus Hale was spotted entering the city limits." Daniel's stomach tightened. He picked up the radio. "Copy that, dispatch. Any indication of direction?" "Negative. Last seen heading southbound. Proceed with caution." Daniel placed the radio back in its holder, his jaw tightening slightly. He glanced into the mirror again. The woman had heard the message. Fear rushed back into her expression like a storm returning without warning. "That's him," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "We're going to stay ahead of this. You're safe with us." She nodded, though her breathing had become shallow again. Ahead, Chief Harlan's vehicle signaled and shifted lanes, guiding them toward a quieter residential area. The convoy turned off the main road, weaving through smaller streets lined with houses and tall trees that cast long shadows across the pavement. "Your sister lives around here?" Daniel asked. "Yes," she replied softly. 3 blocks ahead. Blue house with a white gate." Daniel relayed the information over the radio. The chief acknowledged and adjusted their route. The neighborhood was peaceful, children's bicycles resting near sidewalks, and sprinklers spraying water across green lawns. The calm setting felt almost surreal compared to the tension building inside the patrol car. As they approached the street she described, Daniel noticed a parked vehicle near the corner. His eyes narrowed slightly as he passed it. Dark tinted windows. Engine still running. He kept his expression neutral, but his instincts flared immediately. "Dispatch." Daniel spoke quietly into the radio. "Run a plate check on a black SUV parked near Maple Street corner." Seconds stretched into eternity before dispatch responded. "Unit 4, plate matches Marcus Hale." Daniel's pulse quickened, but his voice remained calm. "Copy." Behind him, the woman gasped softly. "He's here already." Chief Harlan's vehicle slowed slightly ahead, clearly receiving the same update. He pulled over a short distance from the blue house with the white gate. Daniel followed, parking directly behind him. Another patrol unit that had joined from a side street positioned itself strategically nearby. Daniel turned in his seat to face the woman. "Listen carefully. Stay in the car until we tell you it's safe. You understand?" She nodded quickly, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel stepped out, closing the door carefully. Chief Harlan was already speaking with the officers from the additional unit. Their conversation was brief but focused. Watching the house. Daniel joined them. One officer said quietly. Chief Harlan nodded. "We approach calmly. No sudden escalation unless necessary." Daniel nodded, though he could feel tension vibrating through his muscles. The officers moved toward the parked SUV in a controlled formation. As they approached, the driver's door opened slowly. A tall man stepped out, his expression tight with barely restrained anger. "Officers," the man said sharply, forcing a thin smile. "Is there a problem?" Chief Harlan stepped forward, his voice steady. "Mr. Hale, we'd like to speak with you." Marcus Hale crossed his arms. "About what?" "We've received concerns regarding your wife's safety," the chief replied. Marcus laughed softly, though the sound carried a sharp edge. "My wife is perfectly safe. She just has a habit of overreacting." Daniel studied Marcus carefully. His posture was rigid, his eyes darting briefly toward the patrol car where the woman sat. The moment their eyes nearly met, Marcus's expression darkened noticeably. "I think this is a misunderstanding," Marcus continued. "My wife gets emotional sometimes. I was just coming to pick her up." Chief Harlan shook his head slightly. "She's not going with you today." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's not your decision to make. It is when safety is involved," the chief replied calmly. Marcus took a step forward before stopping himself, clenching his fists. The air between them felt electric with tension. Daniel remained alert, watching every movement Marcus made. "You're interfering with my family," Marcus said coldly. "No," Chief Harlan replied. "We're protecting someone who asked for help." Marcus's expression shifted, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He glanced again toward the patrol car. For a brief moment, the mask of composure cracked, revealing raw frustration and something darker beneath. "You think she's telling you the truth?" Marcus said quietly. "You don't know her like I do." Daniel spoke for the first time. "What matters is that she feels unsafe. That's enough for us to step in." Marcus laughed again, though the sound lacked humor. "You have no idea what you're getting involved in." Chief Harlan gestured slightly toward the additional officers. "Mr. Hale, we're going to ask you to leave this area." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "And if I don't, then we'll take further action," the chief replied firmly. Silence hung between them. The distant sound of children laughing somewhere down the street contrasted sharply with the confrontation unfolding on the corner. Marcus stared at each officer one by one before exhaling slowly. He stepped back toward his SUV, opening the door. "This isn't over," he said quietly before climbing inside. The engine roared to life. The SUV remained still for a moment, as if Marcus was deciding something, before finally pulling away from the curb and driving down the street. Daniel watched until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Chief Harlan turned toward the blue house. The front door had opened slightly, and a woman stood in the doorway, watching anxiously. She rushed forward as Daniel opened the patrol car door. The woman inside stepped out slowly. The moment her feet touched the pavement, she saw her sister running toward her. They embraced tightly, both of them breaking into tears. Daniel looked away respectfully, giving them privacy. The chief stepped beside him, folding his arms. "This is just the beginning," the chief said quietly. Daniel nodded. "You think he'll come back?" The chief watched the empty street carefully. "Men like him don't give up control easily." Daniel glanced toward the sisters, who were now walking toward the house together, supporting each other with shaky but determined steps. He felt a mix of relief and concern settle inside him. Behind them, another patrol car slowly cruised past the street corner, maintaining a protective presence. The sun had begun to lower in the sky, casting golden light across the neighborhood. For the first time that day, Daniel allowed himself to breathe slightly easier. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus Hale's quiet threat still lingered in the air, waiting quietly over the neighborhood as the front door of the blue house closed behind the two sisters. Officer Daniel Mercer remained standing near his patrol car, scanning the street while the final rays of sunlight stretched across the pavement. Chief Harlan spoke briefly with the additional officers before dismissing one unit to resume normal patrol. The remaining patrol car stayed parked discreetly at the corner, maintaining a protective watch over the house. Daniel watched as lights turned on inside the home. Through the living room window, he could see the woman sitting on a couch while her sister knelt beside her, holding her hands and speaking gently. The scene carried a fragile sense of safety, like glass that could shatter if handled too roughly. Daniel understood that physical distance from danger was only the first step. Emotional healing would take far longer. Chief Harlan walked over and leaned against the side of Daniel's patrol car. "You handled yourself well today," he said calmly. Daniel nodded, though his eyes never stopped scanning the street. "Do you think he's really gone?" The chief exhaled slowly. "For tonight, maybe. But situations like this don't end with one confrontation. They unfold in layers." Daniel absorbed the words, knowing they were true. Years of service had taught him that danger often lingered quietly after visible conflict disappeared. He glanced back toward the house again. "Do we have legal grounds to place extra patrols around here?" Daniel asked. Chief Harlan nodded. "I've already arranged it. We'll also connect her with protective services and legal support. She's going to need more than just a safe place to stay." Inside the house, the woman slowly stood and walked toward the window. She hesitated before pulling the curtain slightly aside. When she saw Daniel and the chief still outside, she placed her hand gently against the glass. It wasn't a wave, just a silent gesture of gratitude. Daniel nodded respectfully, hoping she could see the reassurance in his expression. Minutes passed quietly until Daniel's radio crackled again. Dispatch reported that Marcus Hale's vehicle had been seen leaving the city heading north. The update offered temporary relief, but both officers knew it wasn't a permanent solution. The chief acknowledged the report and placed his radio back onto his belt. "Mercer," the chief said, "drive around the block one more time. Then we'll clear the scene." Daniel nodded and climbed back into his patrol car. As he drove slowly around the neighborhood, he kept his eyes alert for any suspicious movement. The quiet streets reflected the calm of suburban life, but Daniel had learned that appearances rarely revealed the full truth. After completing the loop, he returned to the front of the house and parked beside the chief's vehicle once more. Chief Harlan stepped forward and knocked gently on the front door. The sister opened it cautiously, her expression softening when she recognized him. The woman stepped forward from behind her, her eyes still red from crying, but steadier now. "You're safe for tonight," the chief said reassuringly. "We'll have patrols checking the area regularly. Tomorrow, we'll help you connect with people who can assist you with legal protection and long-term safety planning." The woman nodded slowly. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would believe me." Chief Harlan gave a small, understanding smile. "Your voice matters. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." She turned toward Daniel. "And thank you for not walking away earlier. You could have just given me the warning and left." Daniel paused for a moment before responding. "Sometimes, doing the job means listening to what isn't being said out loud." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they carried relief instead of fear. She stepped back into the house, and her sister closed the door gently behind her. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow across the front yard. Daniel and the chief walked back toward their vehicles. The street had grown darker, and crickets had begun their nightly chorus. Daniel leaned briefly against his patrol car, letting the quiet settle around him. "Why did you show up back there on the highway?" Daniel asked suddenly. Chief Harlan adjusted his hat slightly before answering. Dispatch flagged the stop when they noticed her history of emergency calls that never turned into official reports. "Something about it didn't sit right with me. Experience teaches you when to trust instincts." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "I guess today proved instincts can change lives." The chief smiled faintly. "Sometimes saving someone doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like simply refusing to ignore fear, from the routine traffic stop to the confrontation with Marcus." The memory of the woman's trembling hands and fearful eyes remained vivid in his mind. He realized how easily the situation could have been overlooked if he had followed routine without paying attention to human emotion. The chief opened his car door, but paused before getting in. "Remember this, Mercer. Authority isn't about control. It's about responsibility. The badge doesn't just give power. It demands compassion." Daniel nodded firmly. "Yes, sir." The chief climbed into his vehicle and started the engine. Daniel followed moments later. Both patrol cars slowly pulled away from the quiet street, leaving behind the blue house and its newly restored sense of safety. The night sky stretched above them, dotted with stars that shimmered faintly against the dark canvas. As Daniel drove back toward the highway, he replayed the woman's words in his mind. He thought about how many people live behind closed doors, carrying silent fears that the outside world never saw. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, feeling a renewed sense of purpose settle within him. Hours later, Daniel parked outside the station as his shift came to an end. He stepped out, exhaustion finally settling into his muscles, but beneath it rested a quiet sense of fulfillment. Chief Harlan stood near the entrance, finishing a conversation with another officer. When Daniel approached, the chief gave him a respectful nod before heading inside. Daniel paused outside the station doors, looking up at the city skyline glowing under the night lights. He understood that tomorrow would bring new calls, new challenges, and new uncertainties. But today had reminded him why he chose this profession in the first place. He stepped inside, signed off his shift, and placed his radio on the charging dock. The low hum of the station felt comforting after the emotional intensity of the day. As he walked toward the exit, his phone buzzed softly. It was a message from dispatch confirming that the woman had successfully filed an official protection report and would be meeting with support services the next morning. Daniel allowed himself a small, relieved smile before slipping his phone back into his pocket. He stepped outside once more, the cool night air brushing against his face. The city moved quietly around him, unaware of the small but powerful story that had unfolded earlier that day. Across town, inside the blue house, the woman sat at the kitchen table with her sister. A warm cup of tea rested between her hands as she stared quietly at the rising steam. For the first time in years, the silence around her felt peaceful instead of threatening. She knew challenges still lay ahead, but she also knew she was no longer facing them alone. Back at the station parking lot, Daniel climbed into his personal car and started the engine. As he drove away, the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. He thought about how one moment of attention, one extra question, and one decision to listen had changed the direction of someone's life. Sometimes, the most powerful acts of courage don't happen in dramatic confrontations or heroic rescues. Sometimes, they happen quietly, in ordinary moments, when someone chooses to stand beside another person who feels invisible. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is refusing to laugh, refusing to dismiss fear, and choosing instead to listen. If this story reminded you that kindness, courage, and awareness can truly save lives, take a moment to support this channel by liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message, and subscribing for more powerful real-life inspired stories. Your support helps bring more stories that inspire awareness, strength, and hope. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story that could change someone's perspective or even their life. Because sometimes, the smallest moment of compassion can become the beginning of someone's freedom.